God's children are not for sale. Hmm. Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. These are interesting times we're in right now. People are finally starting to wake up to all the LGBT indoctrination and grooming of children. And I guess that's what it took for it to reach children. So let's take a look at this whole phenomenon. What's with all the grooming? Well, first, let's get to the motivation here. In my recent interview with Joseph Schambra on his channel, he asked if he could show me a bunch of slides of historic gay rights activists and how they were involved in pedophilia and pederasty, molesting post-puberty adolescents. So you have Harvey Milk, everyone who talks about him as some gay rights icon. They tend to neglect that he was also a pederast. You have Harry Hay, Allen Ginsberg, who gave shining endorsements of NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. I've been talking about NAMBLA for years, telling people that they've been riding on the coattails of the success of the gay rights movement. And then Joseph brings up some studies showing the high rate of childhood molestation by men among same-sex attracted males. So he asked why I think this is, and I gave this response.
This was an interesting study. 46% of the homosexual men, in contrast to 7% of heterosexual men, reported homosexual molestation.
Hmm.
What do we say?
Actually, I think that's one that I brought up in one of my videos. I remember that study looks familiar. So,
What do we say about that? I mean,
well,
I,
homosexuality is not naturally producing. And you want to form a community out of homosexuality, you got to find some reliable way of producing more members of that community.
right.
When you build your whole identity around being an activist so that you're trying to build up your numbers,
Yep.
then you got to find more ways to recruit people.
Yep.
And what easier way to recruit people than to groom them into it?
Boy, that is dangerous to say that. I mean, I've said it because I just feel that it's true. That it's true that I think I was certainly groomed and then abused. So
Yeah. Now, that said, especially I might get myself in hot water for what I said in this interview. um, that is not to say that every individual
no.
with same-sex attraction has that intent and is one of the groomers out there.
Yep.
And I made that clear when I did this three-part series on the gay agenda. Like, there are plenty of people who have same-sex attraction and they just want to live a quiet life and just even if they want to continue to engage in homosexuality, they're not looking to recruit more members to the community. They have no interest in these grooming tactics. They just want to be free to be on their own. Um, and so there are those. Then there's individuals who are probably not even actually same-sex attracted, but they're allies of some sort who just want to feel good about themselves. So they take on some sort of activist passion, and so they want to promote the cause of LGBT inclusion. And so, what does that look like? And we opened up the doors to this with Obergefell, and the church was really sitting on its hands with that one. And
Tell me
again,
about it. Tell
just
me
this
about it.
year with the whole Defense of Marriage Act that passed, that really solidified Obergefell even more. Because once you make marriage so that it can be anything other than a man and a woman, then you don't have a case for arguing against LGBT representation at all ages of entertainment and education. Because what's the difference? No different than a kid in kindergarten seeing a mom and dad family depicted. It's the same thing now. We lost the argument when we allowed marriage to be redefined. the old version of gay activism was we're a fringe community. We just want to be protected from persecution.
Mm-hmm.
And I can even empathize with that to a degree. All right.
But
Certain
they,
anti-Semitic laws,
but they have achieved that.
they already did. They should have. We're done. We got what we needed a while ago. No, it got to the point where people were not aware of what their real agenda was. It was not just tolerance. It never was just tolerance. Well, maybe at one point it was just tolerance, but that quickly was overshadowed by a desire for full inclusion and celebration.
Yeah.
And interesting timing, because recently a video of Professor Derek Jensen has been circulating. He's showing the link between queer theory and pedophilia, and his students, or at least a chunk of them, are getting all triggered. So he plays a little game of Jeopardy to argue his point.
There is a long correlation between anarchism and pedophilia and support for pedophilia. Wait. That's a beautiful line. Thank you so much for asking. How about something relevant? I've been talking about rape culture all day, and pedophilia and the support of pedophilia is not rape culture. Actually, it seems you're acting like this is a spurious connection. So we're going to play Jeopardy. We're going to play queer theory. We're going to play queer theory pedophilia Jeopardy. Okay, answer. Commonly called the godfather of queer theory.
Who is Foucault?
Who is Foucault?
I got it.
Okay, 100 points. Foucault. Another way to ask this is who argued, no, I guess the answer would be, argued for the eradication of age of consent laws as in down to infants.
Who is Foucault?
Thank you.
Okay, next one. The author of the founding document of queer theory. Who is Gail Rubin? What percentage? No, the answer is 50%. Question is?
The amount in that article that was a defense of pedophilia, specifically, quote, boy lovers, so men who fuck boys.
Oh. And since you're not believing me, quote, this is in the founding document of queer theory. Like communists and homosexuals in the 1950s, boy lovers are so stigmatized that it is difficult to find defenders of their civil liberties, let alone for their erotic orientation. That's in the founding document of queer theory. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm using facts. A thousand apologies. One must never let facts in the way. Oh, and she also compared, by the way, she compared pedophilia to a preference for spicy food. The thing is, I have never heard of anyone who has to have years of therapy because they ate hot and sour soup. Okay, so up to 200. Now it is pedophilia and queer theory for 300. That would be author of Macho Sluts. Author of Macho Sluts and Public Sex. Pat Califia. Wait. What was it somebody said? Stay relevant. Okay, let's talk about Pat Califia.
Why don't you respond?
Because you can't fucking transphobe.
Okay, here's something from one of Pat Califia's books. You know, it's really interesting. It's really interesting that when I actually start talking about the relationship between queer theory and anarchism and pedophilia, that it becomes, they really want to shut me up now. Sure do. Okay, so here's Pat Califia. Pat Califia. Oh, wait, just a second. I was accused of homophobia because I'm against pedophilia. Who is it who actually makes the connections between that? Okay, here's something by Pat Califia. Pat Califia has written, any child old enough to decide whether or not she or he wants to eat spinach, play with trucks, or wear shoes is old enough to decide whether or not she wants to run around naked in the sun, masturbate, sit in someone's lap, or engage in sexual activity, by which she does not mean play doctor, she means with adults. She's very clear about that because she also says that pedophiles should be more and not less invested in children's lives. Okay, so we're at 300. 400 is the most famous queer theorist of today. Answer. No, it is not Judith Butler. It's who is Judith Butler? Okay, Judith Butler is the most famous queer theorist of the day.
We see you, all of you supporters here, who do not care about trans people's lives. Every person here supports that you don't.
Okay. Here's a great quote from Judith Butler. Then it's the fucking truth. Are you supporting them? Okay, so Judith Butler wrote, so I keep adding this qualification. When incest is a violation, suggesting I think there may be occasions in which it's not. Why would I talk that way? Well, I do think that there are probably forms of incest that are not necessarily traumatic, and which gain their traumatic character by virtue of the consciousness of social stain that they produce. Yeah, that's Judith Butler. That's one of the queer heroes. Okay, now we have for 500 we have the last one in the queer theory and pedophilia. The answer is queer theorist who has spoken out strongly against pedophilia.
Who is no one.
Who is no one, not a single one. Because the entire thing is based on transgressing.
I'm glad that people are waking up and they're shocked by all this grooming. But I guess I'm bewildered as well by all this shock and the confusion, because I've been trying to explain for years how it's actually inevitable that there would be this grooming of children. It's actually necessary for the LGBT agenda. I explained this a couple of years ago in my 3-part series on the gay agenda, how the surest way to guarantee future homosexuals and transgender people is to go after children, the most vulnerable. Now, how does this lead to pedophilia? Let's take a step back and look at our postmodern world that we now live in and see the inherent danger of a worldview that reduces all morality down to one thing: consent. Right or wrong, all hinges on whether or not someone is capable of giving consent. Because our postmodern world thinks that there are no moral absolutes, people can do whatever they want as long as they're not hurting anyone. But hurting has nothing to do with objective reality. It just boils down to whether or not someone consents. See, true hurting should be about damaging normal processes and normativity and standards for how we're supposed to actually be and function. But when you throw out all absolutes and all objective reality and you just promote subjectivism, then hurting is just based on your feelings and your subjective thoughts. Now, we all used to think that children would be exempt, that they'd be protected from LGBT stuff, because we all seem to agree that children cannot consent to sex. So our stupid culture didn't see anything wrong with legalizing gay marriage when Obergefell happened in 2015, and then this year when the so-called Defense of Marriage Act passed. We didn't think that this would have any impact on kids. But I hope people are starting to realize that this will all have a major impact on children in multiple ways. We'll get to that a little bit more in a moment. So anyway, we thought that kids would be exempt from all this, right? But no, gay rights activism was all based on the idea that they're born that way, despite no definitive proof of this assertion. But it was convenient and it helped their fight to make it about civil rights. Even though we've had Lesbian researchers like Linda Garnett and Lisa Diamond saying that the born gay narrative is false and we don't even need it to secure gay rights. But they let it go, they let it slide because it was convenient to their cause. Well, if people are born that way, then that means that they're gay or bi or pan or trans, etc. from infancy on. So then we need to celebrate LGBTQ not just among adults, but among children, so they can be affirmed in their LGBTQ plus label as early in life as possible. And if marriage is no longer defined as man and woman, then it would be bigotry to not display in children's books and television gay couples with kids as well. So, people were completely ignorant about the impact on children and grooming of children and indoctrination of children when a Birchville happened. Once a Birchville passed, it was inevitable that we were going to see gay relationship representation at all levels of education and media and policy. So kids weren't going to be protected and raised up with the understanding that the norm is male and female natural marriage, and gay couples were a alternative to that. No, it's all equal now. So you can't treat it as an exception to the norm. You have to treat it as part of the norm. We didn't see this coming? And how does this all make children more vulnerable to molestation and pedophilia? Because to have all the gay affirmation in schools, in the therapist office, and in the doctors and surgeons' offices, you must do away with the idea that children cannot consent to sex. Because as much as the activists try to downplay the sexual aspect of their gay activism, of what they're actually advocating for, homosexuality, that's ultimately what LGBTQ activism is about. Who people prefer to have sex with. And once you promote and enforce the idea that children are perfectly capable of deciding for themselves their sexual identity, whether you're talking about gender or sexual orientation, then it's perfectly consistent to argue that they're mature enough to consent to sex with whomever they want. And a clever groomer always finds a way to convince the child that they want to do it with them. It's not forced on them. They enjoy doing this. You like this. This is healthy. This is good for you. You want this. Those are what groomers say. So a child being groomed doesn't think it's being forced on them. No more than kids who are now claiming to be trans are thinking that they're being indoctrinated by the culture and being duped. They think that this is genuinely coming from within themselves. And it's interesting, I was actually working on the script before even seeing the movie Sound of Freedom. And I'm so happy that people are starting to be more concerned about children's safety. So back to motivation. What's motivating all this grooming? Well, I think there's another level to this. It's a symbolic level. Symbolically, LGBT grooming is a counterfeit of the call to be fruitful and multiply. The prime directive, the very first command that God gave humans is to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, spread more of my image across the earth. See, God placed the longing within all of us to reproduce our own kind. And when people with same-sex attraction have latched onto some LGBTQ plus label as their identity, no amount of cultural acceptance will satisfy until they are able to reproduce their own kind of LGBTQ. So, their cause requires grooming because it requires creating a counterfeit of natural family. As much as the queer theorists say that their goal is to deconstruct all norms, they cannot escape that they actually want to create a faux family. The truth is that if LGBTQ identified people were honest, they would accept the reality that pursuing that type of life excludes them from forming a family, that they are opting out of family. That might sound cruel, but that's reality. So if they're honest, then gay couples would not seek children. But to them, they must have children in order to validate their unnatural family, their unnatural union. Therefore, children become a commodity. We are treating children like objects, like their own needs don't matter as much as the validation of their gay parents' validation of their sexuality and their sexual proclivities. The slogan for Sound of Freedom is that God's children are not for sale. But the reality is that children are being sold and treated as commodities in order to validate gay people's lifestyles. It's not just through sex trafficking or child trafficking in South America and Asia that children are treated as objects. So, if you care about children's rights and you do not want to see them treated as objects for an extreme agenda, especially one that feeds validation of a sexual fetish, then you will fight for their right to have a mother and a father. This is a bold thing for me to say. It's not politically correct at all, especially when we've been told for years that children in the homes of gay couples are just as well or better adjusted as their peers in homes with a mom and a dad. But let's look at the evidence a bit more. Katy Faust, in her book Them Before Us, says that whenever you see a picture of a kid with same-sex parents, you're looking at a picture of a child missing a parent. It's well documented that outcomes for children are best when they're raised by their married mother and father. Biological parents compared to non-biologically related caregivers are statistically the safest, most invested, and most permanent people in a kid's life. Fathers especially offer a protective factor against behavior problems in children. And we know, without a doubt, that parental loss is harmful. And children raised in same-sex headed homes all share the same origin stories as the kids just mentioned. They're a product of divorce, they're adopted, or they're donor conceived. Yet somehow we are expected to believe that the feelings of loss, abandonment, and identity struggles of kids in the aforementioned demographics suddenly vanish when the kids are raised by a same-sex couple. Despite the fact these kids have the added disadvantage of missing the gender-specific benefits of a male or female parent, this detached from reality conclusion is obviously motivated by something other than just dispassionate data. Follow the science. So, common sense should tell us that children raised without both a mother and a father are at greater risk for poorer outcomes. But yet we've been told that the research, the studies, show that children in gay parent homes are just as well adjusted. So what do we make of these studies? Well, a few things. Poke some holes into these studies. One, Walter Schumm brings up in his investigations that most government agencies that track child abuse do not also track the abuser's sexual orientation. So, if a child is sexually abused in a home, how often is it that that parent is a gay parent? We don't know. We don't have the data to help us parse that out. And the studies have shown no difference between gay parents and heterosexual parent homes. They actually had very small, biased samples. The recruitment was typically done through friends and advocacy groups. So you're not getting a population-wide sample, and the participants knew the purposes of the study. Walter Schumm also notes that the studies use parental reporting instead of actual child outcome data, actually doing assessments or measures of the children or interviews with the children, but rather just asking the parents, well, how well adjusted do you think your child is? Well, if they know the purpose is to see the comparison between children raised in a gay home versus children raised in a heterosexual home, there's a big incentive to making your child appear as well adjusted as possible. You can't even treat these studies with any validity. Well, in an effort to try to get some real science, Paul Sullins used a random sample from the longitudinal study of adolescent health. And he found that by age 28, children raised in a same-sex parent home were twice as likely to suffer depression. Compared to kids with unmarried same-sex parents, children with married same-sex parents had increased rates of depressive symptoms, fearfulness, and crying. It's interesting. So if the gay parents were married versus unmarried, the risk of depression doubled. How can this be? Well, one idea is that children need love from both a mother and a father, and they need parents in a stable relationship. They need all those factors. A gay marriage may provide better stability in that marital relationship, but it still ends up excluding the love of either a mother or a father completely. So perhaps the children in a home with the gay parents that weren't married, they still had, say, a relationship with the natural parent of the opposite sex. So maybe it was a dad who left his wife to pursue a gay life, and he had a gay boyfriend, not married yet. Maybe there's still more contact than the child had with both parents. But what we also see is with the surrogacy explosion, gay couples, now married gay couples, are using donors and surrogates to have a child of their dreams. And that child will be born and then taken from the birth mother and the genetic mother, potentially as well, and also have the loss of a social mother and only know having two dads. That child is left with this ache and this longing to know their mother. We see this in the stories of the adults who grew up in these homes. For example, Mark Regnerus' New Family Structures study interviewed actual adult children of gay couples about their upbringings. In over half the sample, there were statistically significant higher incidence of poverty, mental illness, infidelity, STDs, sexual victimization, and drug use. And the best study out there, Paul Sullins' massive study of 512 same-sex parent families from the U.S. National Health Interview Survey, showed that 9.3% of children from same-sex parent homes were likely to suffer emotional or behavioral difficulties, compared to 4.4% of children in opposite-sex parent homes. They were significantly more likely to have severe emotional problems, 14.9% versus 5.5%. ADHD, 15.5% versus 7.1%. Learning disabilities, 14.1% versus 8%. And to receive special ed and mental health services, 17.8% versus 10.4%. He found no significant difference in bullying between both groups of children. So the idea that, well, perhaps the worst outcomes are because these children from gay parents are being bullied more than the kids who are from families with opposite-sex parents. But no, there's no difference in bullying between both groups of children. Since same-sex relationships cannot conceive a child that is the biological offspring of both parents, no matter how loving and committed, can never replicate the level of benefit for child well-being that is possible for opposite-sex partners. The problem with same-sex parenting, as previously noted, isn't the gay parent, it's the missing parent. Kids living with same-sex parents not only face the adversity that comes from missing a parent, their difficulties are compounded by a home void of gender balance, a mother and a father together. Outcomes for children of same-sex couples are suboptimal because of biology, a factor for which there are no substitutions. Katy Faust argues, I submit that such intense pressure on kids with same-sex parents to endorse a worldview that runs counter to their most basic instincts may be at the root of the diminished outcomes in Sullins' studies. Unquote. And so there is another form of grooming that we must oppose if we care about children not being treated like commodities to be sold. Because God's children are not for sale. You should not just be able to mail order a child through surrogacy or donor conception or even adoption just to validate and confirm your relationship. We must be considering what serves the child best. Otherwise, we are treating children like they are for sale. So with all this consciousness raising about the rights of children and about protecting them from grooming and from being exploited, I hope you consider the words I'm saying here. Do the research, dig in more. Really consider what we're endorsing. But regardless, no matter where you stand, and if you are a child who's been exploited in some way, or you were as a child, I especially want you to know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully.